You're in the 06010.
Hello and welcome into Fantasy Focus Football, presented by Wingstop, alongside Stephania Bell and Field Yates. My name is Daniel Dopp.
Here we are.
Getting you ready for Week 18, recapping the Monday Night Football game that we just had. We'll be quick on that, I promise.
No, we're not.
No,
we certainly won't be.
No, we won't.
Listen.
And it's okay.
It's okay, dude.
If you're here, it's because you really love fantasy football. Maybe you have a championship here in Week 18 that you've got to be ready for. One of the things that we're going to do, Field, as we were leaving the show yesterday, you said, you know what? We should do like a confidence meter, going through and seeing which teams have something to play for, which teams don't. So we're going to dive in basically the entire show today, looking at who we feel like we can put our trust in Week 18 and who we might have to maybe pull from our lineup because they may not be given a full go on Sunday.
Or we can spend a lot of the show on that, but begin by handing out proverbial, and excuse me while I get up from my chair here.
Uh-oh.
Oops. Probably going to knock some stuff over, too. Proverbial. I should probably stand in front of the microphone again. Proverbial belts this morning to everybody out there who won themselves one of these guys last night.
That's
because,
right.
Of course, some leagues do end after just 17 weeks. If you adjust the default settings on ESPN.com, we're here for you as well. Because I tell you what, last night, like this was not the Bears and the Seahawks last night, where the leading scorer had like 9 fantasy points. Last night, I guarantee you, swung a ton of fantasy championships and maybe took some years off of life's.
Yeah, you know who loves fantasy football just as much as us?
Dan Campbell.
Both Dan Campbell, exactly right. Yes, Dan Campbell absolutely does. Kyle Shanahan absolutely does. Both of these offenses. This game was meaningless. It meant nothing to the Detroit Lions. Well, it meant something personally.
It was not meaning.
From a standings
Dan
perspective,
Campbell would tell you.
it was meaningless. But from how much they cared about the game, absolutely. We got an entire complement of the 49ers starters. We got an entire complement of the Detroit Lions starters. In fact, if you needed Jahmyr Gibbs did exactly what we thought he was going to do. This kid is unbelievable, whether David Montgomery is out there or not. 117 yards on the ground, 46 yards through the air, another touchdown, good enough for 26.3 fantasy points. This kid is unbelievable.
I love David Montgomery, and I want him to be a Lion for a long time. He will be, as he signed that extension earlier this season. I also think it's fair to acknowledge that if David Montgomery were not a Lion right now, Jahmyr Gibbs would be, I don't know about the favorite, but squarely in the mix for 1.01 next year.
Yep.
So if you're watching the game, if you didn't watch the game last night, you woke up and you said, 26.3 fantasy points. That's really good from Jahmyr Gibbs. If you watched the game last night, you're thinking to yourself, 26.3 was awesome.
He could have had more.
So much more.
Yep.
The Lions, because of the fact that David Montgomery is not available, and because of the fact that, yes, they had nothing to play for in the sense that if they win next week, they're going to be the number 1 seed, regardless of what happened last night, they were being a bit judicious with Jahmyr Gibbs. They've talked about how they're going to treat Jahmyr Gibbs until David Montgomery is back.
Yep.
Jamar Jefferson got multiple goal-to-go touches and carries last night. Craig Reynolds, who I thought looked very sharp last night, was playing a bunch. So, Jahmyr Gibbs, you are incredible. In a world in which David Montgomery decided to retire, which he won't, to be very clear, holy cow, Jahmyr Gibbs would be right up there with, again, Jamar Chase, Puka Nacua, Bijan Robinson, Saquon Barkley, Justin Jefferson in the 1.01 conversation. He is the fastest player not named Jamison Williams in the entire NFL.
I agree with that for what it's worth. What he's able to do out there as a solo back, he's not just a speed guy, being able to watch him run up the middle, he's unbelievable. And as a pass catcher, too, 4 catches, like I said, for 46 yards. You love being able to add that. This entire Lions offense, Jared Goff threw for over 300 yards, had 3 touchdowns. Jamison Williams
I'm sorry, a rushing touchdown for Jamison Williams. Stop it.
Jamison Williams finding multiple ways to get in the end zone. He is more than just a deep threat on this team. He crushed it. Amon-Ra, if you needed him, had over 20 fantasy points. Sam Laporta, if you needed him, had 6 catches for 64 yards and a touchdown. Good
Also
enough for
throwing some
18.4 fantasy
there.
points. Some great blocks.
I mean, Sam Laporta did, like, he was the full spectrum tight end last night. That was what I would have hoped we would have seen all season because he got the fantasy production, but he also did all the tight end things and helping his buddies score. So
if you needed any one of these guys in your fantasy championship, every single one of them, every starter, Laporta, Amon-Ra, J-Mo, Jared Goff, and Gibbs, all scored over 18 fantasy points. And shout out to my guy, Jake Bates, who went from being a UFL kicker to, in his first year with the Detroit Lions, now holds the single season points scored record. Unbelievable accomplishment for Jake Bates. You know, guys, that I'm a huge Jake Bates fan, but like very cool to be able to see this story. And if you needed a kicker that was going to get you some points, he's been crushing it.
Yes, well, we will talk about only one kicker in that game last
That's
night,
fair.
and
That's
it is
fair.
Jake Bates. But I think this, for fantasy purposes, when you're going into next year, people say kickers don't matter. You guys know I was a huge advocate of Brandon Aubrey going into the season, but this speaks to the fact that when you have a kicker on a prolific offense, it makes a difference for fantasy purposes.
100%. One of the things I'm very interested in, and we can talk about this a little bit more as we get deeper into the offseason, but we know where Jahmyr Gibbs is likely going to rank once we come to our 2025 rankings. Amon-Ra going to continue to be at the top. I'm interested to see the way that Sam Laporta and Jamison Williams fall into the 2025 rankings, because Laporta obviously drafted very early this year.
Yeah.
And with the resurgence here of Jamison Williams this season, it feels like Laporta's kind of still easily a top 10 tight end, but not the 1 or 2 spot like he was drafted at this season.
He was so good down the stretch, was Sam Laporta. Last night was great. I don't think it's I said this at the time of the David Montgomery injury, and I think this bore out. I don't think it's a mistake that Jared Goff and Sam Laporta and the passing offense in the red zone took off a little bit without David Montgomery.
Absolutely.
I just think that when you have the guy in David Montgomery, who's one of the best finishers in the entire NFL, if you have the ball first and goal from the 5, you might just say 1, 2, 3, 4 shots at the opportunity for a touchdown. And they did not have David Montgomery for these past few games. It, I think, coincided with some increased volume for Sam Laporta, some increased upside for Sam Laporta, and a generally more pass-heavy offense.
Yep.
It didn't need to be that way earlier on this season. So when David Montgomery is back, and by the way, for those that play in Week 18, I don't think I'd go down this path, because I don't think this is going to happen. But did you guys hear Joe and Troy last night mentioning that David Montgomery is like already pleading his case to play
in
Week 18?
Yeah, and I think we've been talking all along about David Montgomery not having surgery, because remember, it was reported originally by Dan Campbell that they expected him to have season-ending surgery for that torn MCL. But within 24 hours, that had changed, because David Montgomery at the charity coat drive he was at said, well, we're still working out, I think the word he used was logistics, but after some consultations and I think trying to evaluate, hey, you have players, this is very real. This happens all the time with medical decision making. You have to look at the construct of what's happening. You're looking at the calendar. You're looking at the opportunity. Guys are trying to get a chance. If we go to the Super Bowl, do you think David Montgomery wants to be on the sideline? He wants to do everything he can to participate in that. So
Yeah.
I think the talk, it might be a little soon to say Week 18. We don't know yet. But I just, for Lions fans, be encouraged that he's going to be back in the playoffs.
I'll say this for Lions fans, and maybe this is going to factor in if you play here in Week 18, but it's so obvious to me how much this offense is going to need to continue to do to carry this team, given where the defense is at. Unfortunately, so many guys are out on the defensive side of the ball. It's been a number of games in a row in which the Lions have given up a ton of points, and without the offense firing on all cylinders, there were two things I wanted to see. I wanted to see the offense look good, because I didn't want to have them just like take a full game off.
Yeah, you don't want to face
Turns out
plant.
they didn't. Exactly.
Yeah.
Turns out they didn't take any plays off. I mean, that's just the Dan Campbell mentality, right?
Is Jack Fox the most overpaid player in the NFL?
Honestly, right now, I mean, he's barely out there.
I know.
You know,
I'm saying that
kicking punts.
facetiously, of course.
But seriously, I mean, we barely use him as a punter. Dan Campbell loves going for it on fourth down. But what I wanted to see most was the Lions get out of this game completely healthy.
Yeah.
Not getting banged up, and we saw that. That's very good, not only
that
for Week 18 for all the fantasy managers, and we'll talk about the Lions a little bit later on in the show, whether you can trust them in Week 18, but for our playoff aspirations.
Yeah.
On the other side of this.
I just want to say for the Lions' perspective, because the 49ers, their mentality last night was not dependent upon playoff seeding or lack thereof. Can we just take a moment to appreciate this one more time? Like, it is so easy. What percentage of NFL coaches do you think play their starters full throttle, aggressive mentality for a full 4 quarters last night?
7% of them.
7%. I don't know what that would be, like 2 coaches.
2 coaches, 2 out of the 32 coaches, I think.
I don't know the exact number. I'm guessing it's well under 50%.
Yeah, I was going to say it's probably a minority.
Yeah, minority for sure. And I think it's probably closer to like 15 to 20%. So maybe a little bit more than you believe,
Maybe
but
4
still not
coaches rather than
significant,
2.
right?
Yeah.
It's the fantasy championship, if not round 1, the final week for a lot of leagues last night. And the Lions, by the way, are amongst the most fantasy-friendly teams in the entire NFL.
49ers not far behind.
Yeah, they are. They are. But yes,
when
yeah.
they're healthy.
Yeah, but just having, but like, what a blessing that was last night.
That was awesome.
It was incredible. Like, thank you, Dan Campbell. You're an amazing head football coach. You're also a very fantasy-friendly football coach. Ben Johnson, you as well. Brad Holmes and the people that assembled this roster. That was incredible. Like, fantasy football requires a lot of luck.
Yeah.
That was, I think, good fortune last night. As somebody, both the finals that I had that were to be determined last night, I was going against Lions. So if I have bags under my eyes and wrinkles on my forehead right now, it's because I had to sweat that game out for a while. That was a miserable experience.
Tell the truth.
We got the job done in them, which was awesome.
Yeah,
but
2 championships.
not fun. Not fun at all.
Championships.
Yeah.
Take a moment.
Well,
Congratulations.
I appreciate you.
You know,
You're very
Bill's
nice
trying
to
to
say
be
that.
all humble. 2 championships won last night.
Yeah,
Brought
was-
home the dub in our Dynasty League over Matthew Berry, who had Amon-Ra and Jared
That
Goff.
sucked. You know how much that sucked to play against last night?
Yep.
God. And we'll talk about them in a moment. Thank you, George Kittle. Thank you, Debo, for especially Kittle balling the heck out last night.
The whole
Not
time
fun.
you're probably asking, Dan Campbell, when are you going to take your foot off the gas so I can, for my fantasy championship, feel like I can relax a little bit?
So last night, I was like, at one point, I just like looked down and I was wearing some I was like, why are my pants a different shade? And I was like, oh my
Why are
God, I'm
palms so
sweating.
sweaty.
So much.
I was
during
not
this
sure
game.
where that was going.
Yeah.
I'm really glad that you
That's so good.
solved that.
It was bad. So it was bad to go against, but it was great for fantasy manager. So it was awesome. Lions, thank you. Good luck on Sunday. Massive game on Sunday night. I want to have an ISO cam on Daniel Dopp because that's going to be a very
That game's
spirited
gonna be
effort.
phenomenal.
Incredible. It's ridiculous to think.
So, and that's another one because on the Vikings and the Lions, like again, 2 teams with a lot of fantasy potential. If you're playing in Week 18, it's going to be a tough one because you're probably going to see some of the guys, but they both want to win. So at what point, the whole time you're going to be sweating it out
Yeah.
for your team of like, are they going to pull starters here and there? Or are they going to keep them going the whole way?
Honestly, what a bummer for one of these 2 teams because right now both Detroit and Minnesota
They both deserve
are
it.
14-3, and one of these teams, or 14-2, excuse me, and one of these teams is going to be 14-3 and turn into the 5 seed.
And go to probably Tampa.
It feels wrong.
It does feel wrong. I mean, honestly, and everyone knows I'm the biggest Lions fan in the world, but Vikings fans, congratulations. Like, this has been an unbelievable season for you guys. I'll save it. I know we're not talking about the Vikings right now, but like, you guys have had an unbelievable season with Sam Darnold as your leader, and it has been not a thing that I, as a Lions fan, expected. But I love the idea. Of course, I would have loved to just walk into the playoffs and not have another, feel like we are challenged in Week 18. But I almost like this more. I mean, Week 18 is going to mean something really fun for both of these franchises. It's going to be very fun to be able to watch. We'll talk about it a little bit more later on in the show. On the other side of this, Stephania, even though the Lions left this game totally healthy, we did see Brock Purdy out there doing everything that this guy could. Unfortunately, at the very end of the game, it looks like his elbow got banged up and he left the game.
Really weird play to me because it wasn't clear exactly how the injury happened. Now, it sounds like he took this helmet or face mask to his throwing arm, hit him in the elbow. I want to say, he got grabbed by the face mask on that, which was missed. But if you looked at his neck, it got yanked. And if you watched just the expression on his face when he went down, it looked like his neck was uncomfortable. Immediately, I thought of the fact he has a history of a stinger. He's been dealing with a shoulder problem on that right side. In that medical treetop view, you look at sort of a cascade effect. You've got the neck, you've got the shoulder. He has a history of an elbow surgery, which, by the way, the testing for that afterwards, his UCL appears intact. I'm not worried about that, actually. But then you saw Brock Purdy on the sideline trying to grip the football, trying to throw. And after a couple tosses, he just said he couldn't go. After the game, Kyle Shanahan said they believed it was a nerve issue, talked about how Brock lost feeling in his arm. Brock addressed it as well, expects to get an MRI today. When you hear about taking a hit to the elbow and losing feeling, it's the ulnar nerve. It sits right there on the inside of your elbow. It's very superficial, so easy for if you guys do it all the time. Right? We've talked about this funny bone.
Yeah.
You hit it, and it's not really the bone at all. It's the nerve that runs in the little groove by the bone, and when it gets hit, you get the zinger down the arm. You can lose feeling in the fingers, makes it impossible to grip. Josh Allen talked about this happening to him in the game, but it was just for a few minutes. I just felt sad for Brock Purdy that was the end to what had otherwise been a really strong performance for him. And then he had 2 picks, that injury. It's not clear whether he's going to play in Week 18, but I think we'll just wait for the testing. I think if there's any question, why push it? I know he wants to be out there. Brock Purdy has a work ethic of just wants to be out there with the teammates no matter what.
He was awesome.
Astronaut, baby.
He was awesome last night.
Brock lit it up. Yeah.
27 for 35 for 377 passing yards.
Over 30
and
fantasy
3
points.
touchdowns. Yeah, those 2 interceptions, unfortunately, were a bummer if you were a Brock Purdy manager. If you're a Lions fan, they weren't as much of a bummer.
Yeah, I was going to say, they were sweet for you and Kirby Joseph.
Watching Kirby Joseph do some things. But Brock Purdy was just awesome last night.
Yeah, a solid season for Brock on the whole for fantasy purposes, right? Not quite as down. It didn't feel like quite as consistent as last year. A little bit more up and down from Brock, but settled in nicely. He was definitely the kind of quarterback you could win your league with this year. I mentioned George Kittle, so we can just do like kind of the players that have been known commodities for quite some time. And I wonder if George might watch the show, because yesterday I talked about how, we got the changing of the guard at tight end, right? And I said, we've passed the baton from Kelsey and Kittle to Bowers and McBride. And then George Kittle went out last night and was like, hey, have you forgotten about me? 8 catches for 112 yards. At one point last night, Troy Aikman described George Kittle with the football in his hands like a bucking bronco, and it was a great description.
I caught that too, and I was like, that is perfect.
Yeah.
That is perfect. He's been saving that up. I was like, Troy,
totally.
that was a perfect description. Like, he's so hard to bring down. He's always been a yards after the catch guy, which is one of the reasons he was so valuable in fantasy when he first hit the scene for the 49ers. It was these huge yards after the catch plays that made him super valuable in fantasy. And last night, you saw it was a little more grinded out. It wasn't like free running, but that's what he does. He's always getting a few extra yards after making a big catch.
Yeah, and I know I said yesterday how those 2 guys are at the top of the leaderboard in terms of fantasy points scored by tight ends, Brock Bowers and Trey McBride, 1 and 2. Number 1 in points per game, George Kittle. So not too far behind. He missed a little bit of time. I think it was just 1 game earlier on the season. But when you're this far into the year, 1 game missed is enough to keep you at tight end 3 for the season. And I'm not trying to throw any disrespect towards Travis Kelce. He is, to me, I think, inarguably one of the three greatest tight ends of all time, maybe the greatest by the time it's all said and done. He may already be there. But Kittle looks more in his prime, so to speak. Like, the staying power of George Kittle, I think, is longer right now than Travis Kelce. Kittle was a joy to watch last night. Isaac Guerrero was solid last night for the 49ers. Didn't, obviously came out of the game clean. That was important there. Had a long 40-plus yard catch. Not a monster day.
Elevate your production.
Yep, but they really were just too busy throwing the football to run it all that much. And Debo was, I guess you kind of have to look at it through 2 lenses, right? Was busy early. 3 rushing attempts for 16 yards in the opening drive. Didn't run the football the rest of the game and had just 1 catch for 5 yards, but it was a touchdown. So he got into the end zone.
Got bailed out.
Wow.
Yeah. I think that Debo, and I thought he returned the ball well last night. He'll be an interesting one going forward. I don't know if Debo is a lock to be a 49er in 2025. We can vet that out during the offseason. But part of the reason why is,
Yes.
whoo, boy, Ricky Pearsall, baby.
If you could say that you would get shot in the chest in the preseason and come back and be doing these kind of things. There was a catch that Ricky Pearsall made early in the game where the ball had to be released by Brock before Pearsall turned around to spot it, but he tracks it, he tips it to himself, catches it, and toe drags to make the play. It was unreal. Like, that was
that was
very
just showing off. Honestly,
it's very advanced for Ricky, but we've known he came into the league with a reputation for having such good hands, but it's taken him a while not only to get over, being shot. He also had an injury to his opposite shoulder in the preseason. So just getting acclimated to being into football and getting work with his quarterback. And Brock and Ricky Pearsall worked together extra. And you could see it show up in the game last night. 28.7 fantasy points for the rookie, wide receiver 7 through this week so far. And I thought really a good thing for them to know going into next season what they have in Ricky Pearsall.
When I hosted ESPN Bet Live on Sunday, my best bet was Ricky Pearsall over 25 receiving yards, and it was plus money at like plus 125.
Did you get it? Did he get there last night? Or
Oh, my gosh. He got there in spades, Fields, Yates.
141 yards. And by the way, like, we've seen performances, and I don't want to dilute the performances of other players, so I'm not going to give a specific example. But you've seen times where guys pile up yards, and it's either garbage time or it's whatever, like, just kind of dink and dunk or wide open. This was like, there was the one long pass where there was a coverage bust by the Lions, but this was pure ball last night from Ricky Pearsall, who was a first-round pick, by the way. Like, this guy was a stud at Arizona State and then Florida. Great to see him be an integral part of the offense last night. And I think that, like, the truth for Ricky is that there's a scenario in which he's wide receiver 1 for the 49ers from Jump Street next year. And for fantasy purposes, even with Christian McCaffrey back in the fold, and even with George Kittle being in that conversation for tight end 1, 2, or 3, wide receiver 1 in a Brock Purdy 49ers offense is probably a top 20 consideration. Got to figure out where Ayuk is at with his health. I mentioned the uncertainty surrounding Debo going into next season. Jawan Jennings will play a role as well, but Ricky is wide receiver 1. Talk about we talked yesterday about the 2024 dynasty crew that you have. Ricky Pearsall obviously wasn't as valuable in year 1 as some of the guys that we brought up, but going forward, even as an older prospect, he's 24 already. Ricky Pearsall has the look of a guy who's going to be around for a while in San Francisco.
Very excited to see what that's going to be able to look like for the San Francisco 49ers. I would not have had on my bingo card that Ricky Pearsall and Juwan Jennings were going to be the top 2 wide receivers for the San Francisco 49ers by the time we got to the end of the season. And now we're going to have some answers that are going to have to be, some questions that are going to have to be answered here in 2024.
It's really, just a shout out from me to all of my fellow 49er fans who suffered through a season where we thought Chris McCaffrey not only was the best running back in the league, but the number 1 player you drafted in fantasy by and large.
Yeah.
We didn't have Christian McCaffrey for the bulk of the season. We lost Brandon Ayuk shortly after that to a multi-ligament knee injury. We went through Jordan Mason. Elijah Mitchell never made it to the season. Then we had Isaac Guerrero. We even had to dip into Patrick Taylor at running back. Ricky Pearsall comes in off of being shot. I mean, the 49ers were expected to run away with the NFC West, and they came in last in the NFC West. So sad for us, but I'm really proud of the team, what they showed last night.
Absolutely.
I think that is what everyone needed to see to feel better about going into the offseason.
They'll be back next year. I feel good about that. I also feel good about, I think I kind of want pick 8 or 9 next year in my draft. Because I think I want Christian McCaffrey in round 1.
You think he's going to fall that far? Because people are going to have
I do think so, yeah. I think there's going to be some serious scar tissue. And there's also so many good candidates, right? Like, I'm not going to begrudge a single human who says, I'm taking Jamar Chase. Like, whoa, crazy idea. The guy's going to win the Triple Crown at wide receiver. Not crazy at all. I saw a team last night, and maybe this is being a bit anecdotal, maybe perhaps a bit football romantic, but, that was a team that could have easily just wilted away and could have played for nothing. Yeah, not them. And I do. Nope. They've played a lot of football over the past 5 years. A lot of long seasons. And I get it. The NFL has a longer off season than any other of the 4 major sports. But this is a team who's going to have a full extra month to think about what they didn't achieve this year and think about what they do want to achieve next year. And while the window is not slamming shut by any means, there are guys on that team who are part of the fabric, George Kittle, Fred Warner, Trent Williams, maybe even Christian McCaffrey himself, who don't have 5 more years of dominant play ahead of them. Yeah. They might be down to a couple of years, and I think next year is a huge bounce-back season for the 49ers.
I also think the stuff that, obviously, Daniel, we know our team so well. You follow them closely. We don't end up talking about it much because this is a fantasy football show. But Kyle Shanahan talked last night about rotating in to the offensive line, somebody who they picked up from another team's practice squad. Yeah. Like that. So to have the night they did, when you think about how much rotation they had up front, Trent Williams is out hurt. We don't talk about that. Dre Greenlaw, who was out injured after coming back from the Achilles and then was really sad about having the calf pain. Like, think about what they lost. You've experienced it on the Lions. They've managed to still be able to succeed as far as win-losses. But these are the things that don't get discussed as much in fantasy, but to Fields' point about them being solid for next year, think if all of that improves, think if they shore up front, they get healthy all the way around, that improves the fantasy performances for everybody that we've been talking about.
100%. Very interesting to be able to see what's going to happen with this team in 2025. A lot of interesting moves are going to happen here over the offseason. But before we just totally look ahead to next year.
Okay.
Let's spin forward to Week 18.
Yeah.
Even if you are not playing a championship in Week 18, just as a fan of football, it'll kind of give you a nice primer of who has something to play for and who doesn't. And let's start with the AFC, if you guys don't mind. We'll start there.
A reminder, our default settings are Week 18. Like that, if you play on ESPN.com and your manager, league manager does not adjust, it's going to be Week 18. You're going to be playing for something this weekend. I get it. Maybe many of the people that watch our show have finished their leagues last night. But we're here to serve everybody. And let's begin, Daniel. And let's highly motivated teams, right?
Yeah, pretty quick with this one, too. When you're looking at teams that are highly motivated to play their players because there's something to play for, Baltimore Ravens.
Like, I expect these teams to play a normal game.
Yes.
Like, I expect the only way in which these teams won't play a normal game, Baltimore, who plays the first game of the week, they play the Browns on Sunday. The game is in Baltimore, I believe. But either way, they need to win to ensure the number 3 seed.
Yep.
If they lose and the Steelers win, the Ravens are a wild card. So they are definitely going to play their guys. Now, if they're up 40 in the fourth quarter like last week, will they pull the guys? Yes. But you know what? For
if
your
they're
purposes,
up 40, yeah.
So Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry, Zay Flowers, Mark Andrews, you ain't got nothing to worry about. If you've been starting them to this point, you start him again this upcoming week. Maybe Zay is more of a conversation because he's, but still.
At this
Lamar,
point of the year,
Derrick
you know
Henry,
what Zay Flowers is.
Yep.
So we're, 100%.
And I don't think Lamar and the Ravens are solely motivated or even that motivated by getting him a third MVP. But if you're looking for the sort of the cherry on the Sunday for his MVP resume for this year, that could happen on Saturday afternoon. And the NFL obviously very strategic with how they lay out these games. The Steelers, if the Ravens win, still have something to do in terms of securing a potential number 5 seed. So, and by the way, this year, there might be some motivation to get the 5th seed versus the 4th seed, because the 5th seed versus the 6th seed. Because would you rather play in round 1 if you're the Steelers, the Ravens once again, or give yourself the opportunity to play the Texans?
I'd rather play the Texans.
Borderline rhetorical question there,
Yes.
but Pittsburgh should be treating the game like they have everything to play for on Saturday night.
Well, so we know what we're going to do with the Ravens. When you look at the Steelers, I feel like it becomes a little muddier, not because we don't know that there's a lot to play for, but just picking guys from this team is a little bit more difficult. And we can get into the minutia of this a little later on in the week when we're talking about rankings and whatnot. But when you approach this, Steelers that you have trusted field, like if George Pickens goes, like I'm playing George Pickens.
Yeah, I'm with you, Daniel. Like, we can dive into where specifically these players rank for this upcoming week, but we're not doing a waiver wire segment on the show today because, truthfully, like, your entire team might need to be folded this week, right? Like, if you have Josh Allen as your quarterback and you've got Travis Kelce as your tight end, and you've got, there are a bunch of teams that have clinched whatever they need to clinch, right? If you have A.J. Brown as your wide receiver, or Saquon Barkley, right? So, like, the waiver wire is a lot. That's what I would say. It's a lot, but it depends on your needs. So we'll dive into where these guys rank. But for now, if you have a Steeler, if you've been rolling out Pat Freiermuth or maybe Najee Harris or George Pickens, you should treat it as normal this week, and it's a good matchup for sure. And if you are looking to replace a Josh Allen or a Jalen Hurts this week, Russell Wilson would be on the radar. You may recall the last time these two teams played, Russ destroyed the Bengals, and which many quarterbacks have done this year. Sorry to our producer, Tyler, who, by the way, deserves a big shout-out as the Fantasy Focus Show League champion with a dominant effort.
Buried that lead.
Crushed it. Sorry for burying that lead.
Oh, that's all right.
He was awesome last night. He was awesome all season. Big shout-out to you for taking down Trophy Smack in the title game. But, yes, Steelers, treating them as normal.
Agreed.
The other thing I would say is George Pickens, that was his first game back, missed 3 games with the hamstring injury. We really needed him. And last week was not great with Russell Wilson being under so much pressure, so he didn't get a huge production. But he came out of the game healthy, which is all you really need to know. And now you have a chance against a Bengals defense that does give up the big yardage. I think you could get a couple really nice big play opportunities from George Pickens. We know Russell Wilson's going to look at him to go deep.
I'm going to hope that we get some big play opportunities from the Denver Broncos as well. They will clinch a playoff spot with a win over the Kansas City Chiefs or a Cincinnati Bengals loss and a Miami Dolphins loss. However, when you have a chance to just go out there and win and you're in against a team that doesn't have a lot to play for in Kansas City.
Again, the Broncos, they clinch a playoff spot with a win or Cincinnati loss and Miami loss. Miami doesn't play until after them, or at the same time as them, I should say. So
They're not going to have the luxury of knowing.
now, is it possible that if the Broncos are getting smacked by the Chiefs with Carson Wentz, and they look over and the Dolphins are getting smacked by the Jets, that they could say, well, call off the dogs? It's possible. It's unlikely, though, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like, I am not banking on the Jets taking care of business against Miami. So I think if you're the Broncos, you are playing this game as if you need to win, understandably so. And by the way, if the Bengals win on Saturday night, the Broncos must win. Like, it's an absolute must that they win in order for them to make the postseason. So Broncos, again, treating them as normal.
As we would.
Yep. Bo, we'll see. You know, the hard part about, I know that we talk about these teams and say, like, yeah, you know, Bo might get the second string of the Chiefs defense. He might for some of it. But keep in mind, you can only make 7 players inactive. And on top of that, you still got to play 22 on the, you know, on either side of the ball. So it may be a watered down, maybe Chris Jones, who's dealing with a calf injury, is not out there for the Chiefs on Sunday, but it's not like the Chiefs can sit everybody. So it is still a tough matchup here for Bo. He probably will be right around the top 10 of quarterbacks this week because how great he has been. But I don't want to create the illusion that Bo is walking in against the Chiefs August 23rd, third preseason week.
No.
Practice squad.
And the Chiefs will start they will start their starters, at least initially, even if they don't, we don't know how much they'll play, but they will start them. And like Field said, there's only so many players you can remove from the equation. They do have the advantage of being in Denver. Like, I like this for Denver. They're playing at Mile High. They have a chance to win this. Like, I think they have a legit chance to win this game.
Agreed.
And why would you if Sean Payton, you're not going to take your foot off the gas. You're not going to leave anything to chance. I think we see the Broncos starters go all out through the entire game.
I'm with you on that, which means we're still trusting Bo Nix and Cortland Sutton and still staying away from the running backs as best we can in this offense.
But what about Marvin Mims? Because that to me is a tough guy. He had such a phenomenal night.
That's a dart throw right there.
I know.
I mean, honestly, I would love to see Marvin Mims take another step and be someone that Bo Nix can count on more consistently within this offense. But that'll be a very interesting conversation. We'll talk about with Mike, too, once we come up later on in the week.
Again, we'll dive into these games more specifically. But just for the purposes, if you're out there right now and you've got a Week 18 championship and you're trying to suss out
an early look ahead,
who do I need to prepare to not have this weekend?
Exactly.
And add a waiver claim to account for. And by the way, like players like Josh Allen or players like Jalen Hurts, and I believe ESPN will do this. I'll have to confirm with Keith Lipscomb. Guys who are previously on the do not drop or cannot drop list will be waived for this week. So
week
like
18.
Saquon Barkley will be droppable because there's really no need to have a player who, as I said yesterday on the show, he ain't playing. If he is playing on Sunday, he might get dressed and play one snap. But I'd be surprised if you saw Saquon for any meaningful time on Sunday. That's not the case, though, for the Dolphins, Daniel.
Yeah, we got Devon Achane, Tyreek Hill, Jonnu Smith, Jalen Waddle. I think, though, my biggest question coming into this, we didn't see Tua last week, Stephania, and obviously that offense is impacted in a major way without Tua. The Dolphins need to beat the Jets. They clinch a playoff spot if they beat the New York Jets and the Broncos lose. So they're going to be going all out to be able to get a dub in this one. Is there a chance? Do we have any updates?
I don't know that there's zero chance, but this was not an insignificant thing. This is the same hip that he had injured in college. Now, it's not the same problem, but the fact that it's in the same hip does give you some pause. And Tua is pushing to play. Tua is pushing to try to come back. He wants to be out there. We know that that's been his MO through his career so far. He will push to come back from the injuries if he can be effective. I think it's a balance, right? Because if you put him out there and there's a setback, but now you end up winning and you make the playoffs, then what have you done if you risk him for the rest of the season, potentially into next year? Or do you hope that you can keep it going and get to the playoffs and then have him be available? So it's a tough call, and it's probably going to be up until late in the week. But I do think that they might get Jalen Waddle back. So Jalen, that would be another pass catcher for the Dolphins that they did not have last week because of a knee injury. I think Mike McDaniel was sort of optimistic last week, cautiously optimistic that they might be able to get him. Yeah. But it sounds like there's a better chance for him to be available this week.
Can I ask you then, Field, knowing that you hear that, I think I'm still all in on Devon Achane, regardless of who's under center. Like Devon Achane, I think I'm still starting. Just given.
Tell you what, man. I mean, so it's going to be so hard to tell you that you can't play a player because your roster might be gutted this week. If you get that scenario is very plausible. Josh Allen, Saquon Barkley, and Travis Kelce is 3 of the guys on your roster. We saw this once again on Sunday, and maybe it was the weather that contributed to this a little bit, but the Dolphins' offense is just not the same level of Voltron without Tua. Jonnu Smith and Tyreek Hill were actually not that much worse for the wear, but Devon Achane had one of his worst games in a long time this past Sunday, in large part because there was no Tua Tagovailoa.
Yep.
He is like Jahmyr Gibbs without David Montgomery when Tua is out there, just an absolute set-it-and-forget-it monster. But Tyler Huntley did not get this offense going in the running game.
I'm loving this music for what it's worth.
I don't know.
Setting the mood, baby.
I know. I was like,
I'm sorry, not to interrupt.
I
For those
know.
of you
I'm
listening
sorry.
to the podcast, you may not have heard that music in the background, but it was sweet.
It just felt like I was like, we're setting this like R&B vibe, and we're talking about.
We're here to welcome Dan Graziano for another edition of Only.
Yeah, oh gosh, we'll have a fun one this week.
like.
Yeah.
But is there a chance?
Dolphins.
I mean, I feel like with Devon Achane, it's that yes or no conversation, right?
Yeah, I think he's probably still in the yes conversation for me. Again, especially the leagues are going to look the ranks are going to look very odd this week because of guys that won't be available. But yes, feel good about the Dolphins, just speaking generally, because they have so much to play for.
Yeah, agreed on that. Will be very interesting to see, though, again, when we're talking about rankings, if it's Tyler Huntley under center, that's going to impact my trust in these pass catchers. Yeah. But it will sort of depend, like you've been saying, and will continue to say all show long, what the rest of your lineup looks like and knowing who else you may not be able to have. Hopefully, you got a handful of Bengals because the Bengals still have.
Listen.
By the way, shout out to the freaking Bengals for being like basically left for dead and fighting their way back here in Week 18. They still have a chance to make the freaking playoffs.
Yeah.
They have to win. They also have to have the Broncos lose, and they have to have the Dolphins lose. But the one thing that they can control is whether or not they get the dub that they need going up against Pittsburgh. So I'm expecting if you've got all these Bengals,
crack them up, baby.
Yeah,
rolling.
exactly. And we know they put up fantasy points. Like, look what happened. Leagues were won last week because of the performance of the Cincinnati Bengals. Their offense is clicking on all cylinders.
Bengals are the AFC Lions, for what it's worth, from a fantasy perspective. They
Play them all. Yeah.
Yep, you just play every single one of them.
On top of that,
I will say.
yep, I know you're going to same place I am. You go first.
Chase Brown?
Yeah.
Yeah, Chase Brown. So it looked like there was a reporting of, was it a high ankle sprain that caused him to leave the game early, some concern about his availability. Now, it sounds like he thinks he's going to be able to go this week. If indeed he has a high ankle sprain and he plays, I'm nervous, to be honest, because that just is such a short amount of time. Even if it's a mild sprain, the ability to be effective and be able to stay in, that one's going to probably be a tough call for me. I want to see what happens during the week. It's so hard because he's been super productive this year. I mean, basically took over that RB1 spot, especially when Zach Moss went out. But I'm a little concerned. And it was late in the game, so we didn't have much to go by.
Yeah, so, and I would just say this too is, I said, we're not going to do waivers today in the traditional sense. There are a couple of guys in which you can do a waiver for tonight, pretty obviously. And I would be grabbing Khalil Herbert tonight, just in case. Again, we don't know. Maybe Chase Brown plays, but you're going to have enough guys that are droppable because you don't need to have multiple kickers or defenses or quarterbacks or tight ends right now. And you can drop a Saquon or a Josh Allen, et cetera, because those guys, as we'll discuss in just a couple of moments, aren't likely to play. But yes, grab yourself some Khalil Herbert. And we can move on now, Daniel, to the teams in the AFC that you probably better make some contingencies for.
Yeah, you want to proceed with caution with this one because there might be a reason why they are not out there for the entirety of the game. Let's start with the Chiefs because we've had this conversation. We've listened to Andy Reid. The number 1 seed is locked up. Do you have a feeling as to how long you think? Is it going to be a quarter? Is it going to be a half?
I think, that's usually, if you go by past experience, I mean, the Chiefs, this is routine for them, right? They're always at the top. They come into this Week 18 pretty much with everything wrapped up, and then they go and win the Super Bowl. This is what they do. But I would say that if you go by what they've done in the past, it'll be about a quarter of play. Depends on how long the drives are, right? If it's 3 and out, you might see them stay in a little bit longer if they have a couple long
touchdown
series.
drive.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Yeah. So I think you're gambling if you are starting Chiefs players because unless somebody puts up that one score before they depart, you run the risk of getting a donut.
Yeah, don't bother.
I agree.
Don't play Chief. Don't play a Chief. Same thing applies to the Bills. Don't play the Bills. The Bills are going to play only because, and I don't know how much everybody besides Josh Allen will play, but Josh I consider sort of the thermometer.
Streak start.
So for those that don't know, Josh has the longest consecutive games played amongst quarterbacks, games started amongst quarterbacks. So and that's something that means something to him and the organization. Josh, as we know, has played through plenty of bumps and bruises. He has such a physical brand of play. It has not prevented him from being on the field. I expect him to be out there for the first drive. Not that this is fantasy relevant necessarily, but the Bills may be motivated on Sunday to see the Patriots lose if you're willing to take the long view, because the Patriots currently own the #1 pick in the 2025 NFL Draft. If they win that game on Sunday, they almost assuredly will no longer have that #1 pick. The Bills are miles ahead of the Patriots, obviously. But a fast way to get better in a hurry is to have lots of draft picks. If the Patriots have the #1 overall pick, they could trade it for multiple other picks. That would make them better on paper. The Bills may say, let's try our best to lose this game on Sunday.
Honestly, this is one of those, I don't want to trust anyone from the Kansas City Chiefs, but if you said to me, hey, you know what, I need a running back because Saquon's going to be out, I think you could do worse than throwing a dart at Ray Davis or Ty Johnson in this.
Totally agree on Ray Davis. Especially Ray. Not the
More
Ty,
Ray than Ty Johnson.
Yeah,
yes.
Rookie player. You got to get him some meaningful reps. So Ray Davis, another waiver wire ad to consider tonight.
What about the Texans field?
All right, so nothing to play for in the sense that they are the #4 seed. They're coached by a former linebacker.
Yep.
A hard-nosed player in D'Amico Ryans.
Mm-hmm.
This is a team that is really, really struggling right now. He is saying they're going to play their guys on Saturday. Do I think he's lying? I do not. Do I also think that that conversation will continue throughout the week? And do I also think that that conversation could change if they come out and have a solid quarter? I do. So this is one of the great perils of playing into Week 18, is that a guy like Joe Mixon may be on the field for, I don't know,
And he was,
20 snaps?
I don't know that he's 100%.
He's not on.
That ankle issue is, I think, still there.
Yep.
And so if you know that you already have a spot in the playoffs, and I agree with everything Field said, and I think if you listen to C.J. Stroud talking about his frustrations and his performance last week, they do want to get that feeling, get it right a little bit. So I think you will see them out there, but how long they stay. And Joe Mixon would be one of the ones I'd be most concerned about.
This is a classic conundrum, Field, and you've both alluded to this. It's like you've got a hard-nosed coach that knows you don't have anything to play for, but to be honest, the team's not playing super great, and you want to feel like you got a little bit of like a pump going into the playoffs. So how much do you want to risk? And it really is the name of this segment, Proceed with Caution, I think plays into this Texans team more than either of the other two teams that we played.
Maybe in the entire NFL, I'd say, actually, because I would hate to tell you guys, like, Nico Collins is my third-ranked wide receiver this week, and then have them play 2 drives and have them say, hey, time for Nico to get off. But, like, and I get it. They ended up playing last night. They came out clean. But last night, like, amon-ra at one point makes a catch and jumps up, and he's hobbling.
Hobble.
Like, oh, God. Meanwhile, Jahmyr Gibbs got like a face laceration.
I was sick to my stomach for like 30 seconds until that happened.
Gibbs got like a massive face laceration.
I saw that.
At one point too. So part of me is like, I respect the hell out of Dan Campbell and their ethos, but at the same time, you understand why teams may change their plans within the course of the game. So proceed with caution is the appropriately described way.
Not to mention, when you're a team who's lost Stephon Diggs, who's lost Tank Dell to the horrific injury that you saw, you are perhaps a little more gun-shy than the next team. I mean, we can all say injuries happen. There's a 100% injury rate in the NFL. But C.J. Stroud has not been right since the Tank Dell injury.
Yeah.
It's his best friend on the team. He was there. He saw what happened. It was a hard enough thing to watch on the television. Think about that. And I don't think we talk enough about how that does impact a player. C.J. Stroud struggled to get back at the game. He did what he could, but he was being talked to and propped up by his teammates. They have to be thinking. There's 2 ways to look at this. One is you don't want to risk the severe injury because you feel like, okay, we've already been snake bit by this. Yeah. But the other is you want mentally to get over a hurdle, perhaps, of like, you've got to feel good and you've got to feel strong, and you can't be worrying about those things going into the playoffs. So it'll be interesting to me to see how they approach it. Unfortunately, for fantasy purposes, I don't know that it's totally predictable until you get into Sunday's game.
Yeah.
It's going to be very interesting to be able to see. Obviously, listening to some of the coach speak from now until we get there will hopefully be able to help us decipher some of the things that we think are going to happen.
Yep.
Let's spin forward, talk about some highly motivated teams in the NFC. And I do want to say this. I could talk about the Detroit Lions for an hour, but we just spent the top of the show talking about them. They're playing the Minnesota Vikings. Both Minnesota and Detroit have everything to play for because it is the #1 seed in the NFC.
Fully loaded, play him as is.
Yep.
Again, David Montgomery thinks he has a chance to maybe return soon. Not planning on that. So Jahmyr Gibbs, Jared Goff, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Sam Laporta, Jamison Williams. All 5 of those guys would be in my lineups if I were playing into a Week 18 championship. Same goes for Sam Darnold and Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison and TJ Hawkinson and Aaron Jones, which it sounds like he's going to play a little bit banged up with that quad, Stephania.
Yeah,
but
quad injury. Sounds like he has a decent shot to play. This is kind of watch the practice reports through the week. Again, this is one where it sounds like he's going to play, but he's had a couple soft tissue injuries, and you don't want to run the risk of him getting worse. If you really can't run and run without, run freely without limitation, then I would think they might hold him back. So just stay tuned.
Full steam ahead for both the Lions and the Vikings. When you look at the Buccaneers, they clinched the NFC South with a win over the New Orleans Saints. After what the Bucs just did in Week 17, you should have no trepidation in starting all of these guys as well, like we just talked about. Baker Mayfield should be good to go. Both of the running backs, if they play, should be good to go. You got Mike Evans and Jalen McMillan. Cade Otton did not play this last week. I feel like he's probably the one guy that's a little farther down this list. Jalen McMillan.
we'll figure out. Yeah. McMillan's been red hot. I mean, he's got 6 touchdowns in his last 4 games. He's been ridiculous. Baker has been money in the bank. And that game against Matthew's 2 quarterbacks were Jared Goff and Baker Mayfield.
Holy smokes.
Wow.
So, and my quarterbacks were Lamar. So obviously Lamar held up his end of the bargain, and Aaron Rodgers, who did not. Who I almost started myself over Aaron Rodgers. Yeah, 0.48 points. So thankfully the strength of the roster was not the second quarterback, but some other spots there. But yes, so Baker has been money. So yes, you're all good with your Buccaneers. You're all good with your Falcons as well. Their NFC South counterpart, Daniel, is they have to win and have the Bucs lose to make the postseason. So to the extent that you trust, obviously Bijan, Drake London, and that's probably it, right? I mean, our no doubt about it, set it and forget it Falcons, right?
I think Darnell Mooney, prior to the last handful of weeks, was closer to that, I must start him as a flex. Kind of fallen off just a little bit more of a dart throw.
Such a good matchup so that he would be enticing to me. I mean, we saw the Panthers.
100%.
I would expect the Panthers defense, injury-wise, to look much like it did this past week. Not a team that needs to risk a player like J.C. Horn, who missed last week, going out there with whatever he is dealing with. I think it's a hamstring to be specific. I expect the Falcons to move the football effectively on Sunday. So Drake London, yes. Bijan, yes. I think Mooney, especially if you're in a gotta-have-it situation, trailing by X number of points going into Week 18, pretty good option there.
How have you felt just watching this offense with Michael Penix Jr. under center for the last couple of games?
Yeah, I'd say that it hasn't been a holistic change. It's not like they have totally recreated the wheel of what they do. Penix, you almost have to throw out the first game when they play the Giants because the defense scored 2 touchdowns and he barely had to do anything. The throw late in the fourth quarter a couple nights ago was fantastic. That was a big-time throw.
Laser.
He's got a laser. He's got an absolute it's a beauty. He's just an awesome pocket thrower. Hasn't been as prolific as. Talk to me on Sunday afternoon, because I think after Sunday afternoon, the perception of what this offense looks like could be really good.
Okay.
But I didn't think the style. Two
starts and one was
2 starts. It's just coming out of Kirk Cousins. It's does it feel like we have a little bit more confidence in some of these guys? It
feels like you can move the ball down the field. I mean, I think that the aggressiveness and the ability to move the ball down the field is different. And so we like that for fantasy purposes because now you're looking at more big play opportunities for I feel like Drake London just bumped up,
Yeah. Drake London's been great this year. Love to be able to see him kind of unlock what we thought was in the tank for Drake London in this offense.
Great player.
In spite of the fact that Kirk Cousins has struggled this year, Drake has been really good at the wide receiver spot. Let's talk about a couple of teams you need to proceed with caution here in the NFC. we mentioned this as one of like the poster children, poster guys, whatever the right
This one's easy.
phrase is.
Yeah.
Saquon Barkley is so difficult because in spite of the fact that we want to be able to see him break Eric Dickerson's record field, you gave us a lot of reasons that it's not going to happen.
It's not, and Nick Sirianni was asked about it yesterday at his press conference. He said, "Hey, we're still working through that. I like to give you guys as much information as I can when I have." He said, "But I want to tell my players whatever I decide before I tell you." Tea leaves, pretty obvious here, right? If he was going to play, he could have said it yesterday. So I expect the Eagles to sit all of their core fantasy starters. Jalen Hurts, if he even clears concussion protocol, would be one. Saquon, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, no reason to play those guys. So, nope, do not start an Eagle this weekend. But that's the only NFC team that I am 100% convinced you won't see their guys on Sunday.
See, I feel like I don't think you're going to see many of the Rams. And I think you might see them a little bit, but what do we know about the Rams? They don't play their starters in the preseason. They've always been this way about protecting their starters when it comes to health issues. So
I would normally agree with Stephania with one caveat. The difference between the 3 and the 4 is the difference between avoiding the Lions or the Vikings.
True.
I would love to not face.
I'm not necessarily saying they won't play at all. I just think they might get yanked.
Okay. Yeah. If the game is decided early,
the game is. It's.
I could be. I'm admitting, like I'm not. Stephania has great reasoning behind her logic. My personal expectation is they play to win this game. It's not that you won. It's not like you're loving the chance to play the Packers or the Commanders. But good Lord, do you really want to play the freaking Lions or Vikings in the first round of the playoffs? I certainly wouldn't want.
Not in their stadiums, no.
Well, they do know the Lions quarterback.
Yeah.
They know a thing or two about him.
Do you think that this is going to be a situation where there might be, like, you can look at one of these backups, like a Blake Corum or a Cooper Kupp? Because I think Cooper Kupp is unfortunately a backup wide receiver at this point. I mean, what do you do? Are you just out on all the Rams?
I'm playing my Rams.
You are?
I am playing Puka, and I'm playing Cameron. So that's my approach if I'm in the title game. And Stephania has every right to disagree, and so she may approach it differently. My personal approach is thinking they're going to want to win. That's just my own thought.
This is part of why Week 18 is so tough, because you're going in and it's like we're not really sure what either of these coaches are going to do. But Stephania, I totally get your point too of just wanting to be a little risk averse.
I just think that that's how McVay has operated. And again, I'm not saying that they won't play. I'm saying that if they get to a point in the game where they feel comfortable about where they are, they may decide that that's enough.
Yeah.
And the good news with a circumstance like that is usually you get there because, hey, you're up 21 points and it's 10 minutes to go in the fourth quarter, which probably means you've got what you need.
I was going to say who they play
I could tell the look on your head. They're playing the Seahawks. It's a late game. It's late in the day, 4:25.
What about the Commanders? Who do the Commanders play this week?
They play the How About Them Cowboys.
How about them Cowboys? Right now, the Commanders have the either 6th or 7th seed locked up. I want one more game where the starters play just so that Terry McLaurin can end the season on a better note than the Week 17 game.
General sense is they'll play their guys.
Okay.
For a couple of reasons. One, I do think the 6th seed could be valuable to them. Not saying that going to L.A. is easy, but if you get the 7th seed, you're going to Philly, no matter what. And the Philly, as we know, Philly is, and I know the Commanders just beat them. I know the Packers played them all the way back in Week 1 because the Packers are the other team in this equation. But I think all things being equal, you'd probably prefer to not go to Philadelphia. On top of that, rookie quarterback, valuable reps here. Obviously, you'll be smart about it, but this is a team that's accomplished a lot in year 1 with Jaden Daniels. And I think getting to 12 wins is significant to them, in my opinion. So I'm expecting them to play their guys.
Gosh, that's it. All right.
Watch Terry McLaurin have a fantastic.
Oh my! It would be so fitting, right?
Yeah, that's how it's going to work out.
Yep.
One of the other teams that we got to talk about here is the Packers. We just mentioned the Commanders have either the 6th or 7th seed locked up. The other one on that side of the equation is the Packers, who also have either the 6th or 7th seed locked up. The only difference here is the fact that the Packers, I just don't have a lot of confidence in these guys from a fantasy perspective. Josh Jacobs, if everyone plays, then I'm playing Josh Jacobs. But I still don't feel great about Jordan Love. I don't feel great about any of the pass catchers. I feel like I'm still throwing darts if I'm trying to choose which one of these guys is going to be involved. Do you feel any differently in this conversation?
I personally do not. The only thing that I would note here is that these games, the Packers, Bears, Cowboys, Commanders being played at the same time, if the Commanders win, they get the 6th seed. The Packers win, the Commanders need to lose to get that 6th seed.
Okay.
Green Bay might be more likely to scoreboard watch, and if the Commanders are up 21-0 at the halftime, the Packers may say, all right, like the Lions with Jahmyr Gibbs last night, hey, here's more Emmanuel Wilson or Chris Brooks for the Packers backfield. That's the kind of thing that, as far as I'm concerned, like if I'm debating between playing Josh Jacobs or not, you have to treat him like he's going to play a lot of the game going into it. So I'm playing my Packers to the extent that you have Packers confidence as normal. So Josh Jacobs, lineup lock. And then beyond that, Daniel, I think it's probably every other player, I think, based off of their performance this season, is a debate.
Correct.
It's a great matchup, though. The Bears have fallen apart defensively since they fired Matt Eberflus.
Yep.
They're reeling bad.
I mean, we were saying that, though, and maybe,
I guess they were falling apart until Thursday when they looked pretty good defensively.
We were saying that this was potentially a great matchup for all the pass catchers last week for the Packers when they took on the Minnesota Vikings, who have given up boatloads of yards and receptions and touchdowns to the wide receiver position, and we still didn't really feel like one of those guys materialized as like the set-it-and-forget-it starter here in Week 18. So you're throwing a dart a little bit if you're trusting a Packers wide receiver here in Week 18, even with something to play for. All right.
Can I ask you guys a question?
Yes, you can.
Sure.
We all play in leagues that end in Week 17 only, right? Do you guys have any Week 18
I don't have a
leagues?
single Week 18 league.
I don't have any week.
For what it's
do I?
worth, I use the league manager powers within the ESPN game, and I would suggest that a bunch of people, if you do play into Week 18, you switch your league over to having league manager powers so that you can make some of these changes, like having your season finish in Week 17.
Yeah.
There's just less variation. The whole reason of this entire show is just so much variation heading into Week 18, so that's why I would suggest a lot of people consider using that within our app.
I think this is going to be a conversation I want to have when we're coming into next season, because it is different with the expansion of the bye weeks that push out so late. Like, it changes where you can have fantasy playoffs, right?
Yeah.
Because the bye weeks go into week 14.
Correct.
And so all you've got left is 15, 16, 17, 18. So you start looking at how many teams in your league are making the playoffs, because of course you have to whittle it down.
The NFL has made fantasy tough.
Yeah,
And that extra week has now made it, it's this odd number, and so it makes it challenging to decide how you're going to handle your fantasy playoffs. But how good do you feel about a championship being won on a bunch of,
Yeah, it's tough.
rotated out players?
Mitch Trubisky
I don't want to
carried
say
me to my
scrubs,
playoff.
but essentially,
exactly.
right? Like, you look at who got somebody to the championship, and maybe you were a team that crushed it all season, but half your starters end up sitting out. Is that really the way you want to take? You want to give up the title or win the title?
Why not? The reason I ask is so we all play in leagues that are done. So we are done. There's no more lineup.
Got nothing to play for.
You wake up this morning feeling a little bit more at ease?
I did, because I knew it's officially over. I just get to watch football as a fan at this point, and not.
Yeah, I'm bitter because I don't have anything to play
different.
for. My team is out of the playoffs. I'm just.
I was bitter 2 weeks ago.
I know. I'm still in. That's why I'm wearing all black today.
I don't know. I kind of this morning I was like.
Well, yeah, because you just won 2 championships.
But independent of that, right? Like independent of how your teams did, I'm sort of like, you know what?
No.
At least I don't have to agonize.
Not independent.
Over
I'm sorry. I'm petty. I'm that person. I won the War Room League last year. I was field last year. I felt good. It was done. I was happy. This year I'm like, no, I'm not happy.
I will say,
didn't win anything.
I don't know.
I think it's what Stephania brought up. I think is a really great conversation, because when you look at how just going into next season, with buys being in Week 14, a lot of people, and I think a lot of leagues, enjoy being able to have 2-week playoffs.
Yeah.
So that rather than just 15, 16, 17, you're done. The problem is, if you still want to avoid Week 18, then your playoffs start Weeks 14 and 15.
Right. Can't do that.
And Weeks 16
Right.
and 17, you can't have the first round of your playoffs be a bye week.
Unless the only other solution would be if the NFL comes to its senses and doesn't have 6 teams with a bye in Week 14.
Maybe you have
just
2.
2. And so at least in the draft, okay, 2 teams I can work around.
That's still so.
6
It's
I
made
can.
it so tough.
They got to find some way. They got my general, because I had in a lengthy group chat, the great HGC Fantasy League. My buddies here in West Hartford. It pains me to shout out my buddy Matty Curran for winning the championship last night.
Shout out, Maddie.
No, don't shout him out.
Oh,
he didn't
you
deserve
suck,
that.
Maddie.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Field's getting
But it
greedy.
pains
Field
me.
won 2 championships. I'll shout you out.
Okay, you guys are better people than I am. But we had a conversation going last night. One of the guys really wanted to move it up because he had some players impacted in Week 17, and I said, the biggest counterpoint to moving up your playoffs is exactly, 14, and you're like, oh, wow, first round of the playoffs, and I have no Jaden Daniels or
Lamar Jackson.
Derrick Henry, so you probably have to play it. I also thought, and again, we're in the closing minutes here, so I don't want to dive too deep into this, but I felt like this year we had like the Chuba Hubbard situation. That's a relatively uncommon thing. It's a logical thing. I'm not begrudging them at all. The guy's got a freaking grade 2 calf strain. They found out on Friday night. Like, they're not doing this because like they don't believe. Like they're not doing this. There's no hijinks involved here for Carolina. Like
That's kind of like CeeDee Lamb.
Yeah.
And they shut him down. Same thing.
Yeah, when you have nothing left to play for, like you're going to make decisions for your best players that are already financially secure, by the way. CD and Chuba both got extensions in the past 6 months. Like, it's normal. I thought we just had some bad luck more so than, like, teams accelerating the calendar by design.
That's why we're so excited about this Lions-49ers game, because you had two coaches and two teams that were like, we're going all the way through week 17.
Yeah, it was like, and tons of offense.
Yes.
Just ping, ping, ping. Score.
Love it.
Lots of big big plays on the ground, through the air. Fantasy goodness everywhere.
Anytime I get a hook and ladder in a football game, I always feel good about it for what it's worth.
Oh, God, that was
good.
so well.
By the way, I will say this, and then we'll close the show out.
I know, the gadget plays for Jameson Williams would just...
Oh, they're great. They're great.
Stock up, baby.
He's so good. I was really proud of Ricky Pearsall Jr. having what should have been a designed pass, it looked like, and rather than make a bad decision, he's like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to throw it away. I'm not going to get tackled and lose 8 yards. I'm just going to get rid of it. We'll get another down, live to fight another day. Like, that's one of those heads-up plays I love seeing people make.
Totally agree. The little things in football, I definitely am a sucker for. I agree.
Yeah.
Good call on that. Yep.
Yeah. All right, that's going to do it for us today. We are not going to be here tomorrow with
Happy New Year, everybody.
Happy New
Exactly.
Year, I know.
We will be back on Thursday and Friday. Thursday with Mike Clay. Friday, Stephania will be back with us to dive into everything that is Week 18. Today's show is presented by Wingstop. Go check them out.
Congrats,
Don't forget
champs.
to love each other.
Make good decisions on New
Kind
Year's
to
Eve,
yourself.
people.
Very much have fun here on New Year's Eve. Be safe. Make sure if you're driving, you're wearing your seatbelt. And hopefully you guys have a ton of fun at your parties. We'll see you guys back here on Thursday.